All right. So this, and then after that, I've got detailed assignment descriptions. So I guess if you flip back to page 5, you can see the items due in the right-hand section. We've got an oral presentation conclusion we'll do next week. We've got a written conclusion, which we'll do the following week. Some technical presentation, some other stuff, et cetera, et cetera. I will explain it all as we go, but there's not a whole lot that's missing here from the assignment descriptions. You can get a really good sense of what you need to do for each of these assignments and a really, really good idea of how I'm going to grade this assignment just by reading the little blurb on the following pages. So I've got a description, a due date, a little rubric of how it's going to work. All right, so that takes us through a number of things. One thing I'll mention, number 7 on page 9, the on-camera exercise scenarios. So I mentioned we're going to practice some video conferencing, some press conferences, and some interview skills. What I've done is I've created some scenarios, and I want you all to participate in these scenarios. So there's a video conference scenario where I've got this story about an annuity processing company that's having some problems with their processing. So we're going to have a couple of you play the role of the processors, a couple of you play the role of the salespeople, and then we're going to get on video conference and see if we can sort out this complicated problem over video conferencing using the skills that we've just gone over in class, that we will have just gone over in class. So, and then there's another video conference scenario. There is some interview topic scenarios. You can create an interview topic and work with someone else to interview you, and we can practice that. And there's also a press conference scenario. There, the chairman of BP is apologizing for spilling millions of gallons of oil in the Gulf Coast states. So read through that in your leisure time and think about which one or maybe 2 of those roles sound interesting to you and you'd like to play for the on-camera workshop in class 7. And I think we're scheduled to assign roles in class 3, which is 2 weeks from tonight. So sometime before 2 weeks tonight, read through that part. All right. So on page 14, I've got assignments and point value. All the assignments listed with their due date and their point value. Now, class participation. Class participation is a large part of your grade. This is a business communications class. The value in what you learn here is going to be coming to class, participating in the exercise. There's no final exam. The exercise or the assignments are not necessarily related to complicated content. It's just coming here and practicing. So I do want you to make the effort to get here, of course, and use this as an opportunity to engage in class. Ask questions. Very important also that you comment on the work of your fellow students for a couple reasons. One, because your opinions are very valuable to your classmates' development. You will see things that I don't. You'll be able to help them improve their skill. That's one reason. The second reason, and probably even a more important reason, is your ability to look at someone trying to communicate something and assess whether or not they're doing a good job and why they're doing a good job is going to be very important to developing your communication skill. Looking at someone and say, well, they're not really reaching me. They're not really being clear. Maybe the reason they're not being clear is because they're not using good body language like we talked about. Maybe they're not being clear because they're not using the presentation technique to present a graph. And your ability to think critically about that is essentially going to improve your communication skills. It will improve your communication skills. And you're going to have more opportunities to do that in this class and throughout your career than you will to actually communicate and practice yourself. So your ability to think critically. And I hope by the end of this class you will see tons of examples of things that are communicated effectively that make a difference because of the way they're communicated. As a person who coaches people on communications, I believe the way something is said is of utmost importance and is often much more important than what is actually said. And I think you'll see some examples of that as we go. And you'll think about how to improve your own skill by participating aggressively in class. As far as the points, I've got it broken down for 5 points for each class, 5 class participation points. And actually, I think I skipped over this part. It's back on page... Did I skip over it? Oh yeah, back on page 3, attendance and class etiquette. So I'll assign you 0 to 5 points for every class. 5 points for getting here on time and making a significant contribution to class. 4 points for a little bit of contribution. 3 points for just being here. And 0, 1, 2 points. I guess I never really give 1 or 2 points. I give 0 points if you don't come. 1 or 2. I've never really given 1 or 2 points. But each class, think about trying to make a significant contribution. Now, if you miss class, and it's understandable, people will have things going on, there is an option to get class participation. I will video record most classes. I've actually got a little video recording going right now. Not very great quality, usually my laptop. Sometimes when we do class presentations, I'll bring my camera so you can have a better look at yourself presenting. But this will be available to you via Blackboard. I'll have a folder which will have class recordings. You can watch class, and you can make comments via email to the rest of the class. And you'll do the same thing that you might have done when you're in class. You will say, hey, Venetia, I think you did a really great job presenting that graph, but I would have recommended you explain the axes more effectively before you went to the key point. That's something you might say. So you watch class, you use the Blackboard option for email to make, I think, what are the instructions? 2 or 3. Did I skip them? No. Attendance are required for each class. No, I guess I must have just left that part out. Yeah. I am, wow, focused. Oh. All right. So anyway, I guess I left that out of the syllabus, but you always have that option if you miss class to watch the video and email class comments. Okay, any questions about that? Yes, Armand.
So in a situation where you do have to miss class, obviously, I mean, almost every class there is some sort of presentation that we're doing. You said we get the participation for watching the video and commenting, obviously. But what happens to our presentation at that point? And then we just get a flat 0 for not doing the presentation. No. We can always make up a presentation, okay. And that's generally not a big issue because in terms of graded presentations, you have your oral presentation next week. You have your technical presentation in class 4. I think those are the only 2 graded presentations, right? Yeah. Well, I'll talk to you after class.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't, because this will be like a conversation.
Okay, no problem. Hey, how you doing? Syllabus and class slides there for you. Okay. So, where are we at? That brings me to attendance. Okay, the very last thing I want to discuss, plagiarism and cheating policy on page 15 and 16. This is a bit of a downer. I'll try not to be too depressing about it, but I do have learned by experience that I do need to address it because there are often plagiarism mistakes that I've seen happen in this class, and it can be very difficult if I don't spend a couple minutes talking about it. There are a number of exercises in this class, particularly with writing, where I'll ask for a very specific format. And we'll go over the format of how I want most writing submitted later in class today. But sometimes students have gotten confused and think that I just want that format, and I don't want original work. I want your original work, your original words. Sometimes it's tempting to copy something off the internet and put it into that format, but I want to encourage everyone to not do that. for a couple reasons. One, because it's not helping your educational development. Two, as I'm reading that and I'm trying very hard to help you with your educational development, if I realize it's something that's been copied off the internet, then it's going to make me very, very frustrated. And I'm going to say, I'm trying to help you, so please do not copy anything off the internet. A couple other reasons why I've seen folks get confused about that before. Let me just list these reasons on the back on page 16. I have had students that have not realized that copying a whole sentence or a whole paragraph and pasting it into your essay constitutes plagiarism. What plagiarism is copying, I would say, 3 or more words from any source and not citing that source. Is everyone familiar with the definition of plagiarism? Have you heard of that before? Okay, so copying 3 or more words in a row from an internet source. If you do that, you need to put the words in quotes, and you need to say where the source is from. And I have had situations, like I mentioned, come up where a student says, well, I didn't copy the whole essay, I just copied a paragraph. So, any 3 words in a row must be cited and quoted. So, number 1 is students just copy to save time. Number 2, students sometimes don't realize what constitutes plagiarism, which we've just gone over quickly. Number 3, and I've seen this a bit, sometimes students who have trouble with English will often look to internet sources to find the most effective way to present something in writing, or say something in writing. And that's okay. That's perfectly okay. If you want to look on the internet to think about how you might present something in writing, just be sure that you're not copying that thing into your essay. And the last one, number 4, I talked about structure. Like, I have a very clear structure in some of these exercises, and students have sometimes gotten confused that I just want that structure and I don't want the original work. I just want everyone's original work so that I can help you improve your writing skill. Any questions about that or anything else in the syllabus or the structure of this class? All right, fantastic. So let's go ahead with our content for tonight, which is focusing on conclusions and objective in presentations. So we did the greeting, course overview. We're going to do a quick career goal exercise. It's going to help us think about these concepts. And then the 2 key words for tonight are going to be objective and conclusion. When you're presenting, you want to have a clear objective, and you want to use conclusions to achieve that objective. And we'll talk about the oral conclusion presentation, which is going to be next week. Then we'll talk about how we write conclusions with a fairly structured format that I'm going to go over tonight. And then I'll explain your written conclusion assignment, which will be due 2 weeks from tonight. So, we went over the syllabus, we had questions. All right, so let's do this quick career goal exercise, just to get us started off practicing some communication. So I would like you to, you're just going to do this in your seats. Just pair up, and if we have an odd number, we can have a group of 3. But I think we're just even. Yeah, just go ahead and maybe the person next to you, pair up, and decide between yourselves. One person is going to be the speaker, one person is going to be the listener. So why don't you pair up and decide that right now, and then I will give you further instructions. All right.
What are we speaking about?
Okay, so does everyone know who this speaker is? Who's the speaker in each group? Raise your hand if you're the speaker in each group. Okay. The speaker is going to explain to the listener your career goals. You've got about 30, 45 seconds to explain your career goals to the listener. Make sense? All right, go for it.
One of my design goals are my goals make companies so want to elevate that company to the next level so generate more profits. I still have music marketing and I also want to get that pushed up. So in the beginning stages, so it's something I would like to make sure after getting exposure, make profits and all that. Like career goal would be finish my MBA. My career goal, working more class.
Yeah.
And as in careers, yeah.
Okay, everyone done? All right. Go ahead and wrap up with your career goals. All right, now, the speaker is going to speak again, explaining career goals, but this time, I want you to try to convince the listener that they should have the same career goals as you. Your objective in this exercise is to literally convince the listener that they should have those same career goals. Now, if you are successful in achieving your objective, at the end of this 30, 45 seconds, the listener will say, yes, I want to have those career goals too. Make sense? Okay, go for it. Speaker, convince the listener.
So the name of the company is called Four Seasons Multi-Service. What they do is they do maintenance, they do construction. Overhead costs is literally zero in it. How you generate revenue is you have set of workers. They do either take out the garbage, do lighting, whatever the case may be. You do no work whatsoever. Let them work for you, and you're just pretty much like a 60-40 split. So it's something that's low cost, easy to start on business, to do maintenance. The workers and type of experience, it takes a lot of revenue. It might be a little difficult to get certain sites. We started with 1, and now we're up to 7 or 8. Music industry.
All right, wrap it up. About 5 seconds left to make that sale.
Okay. 15 seconds. It's all the same.
All right. So is anyone convinced? Has anyone said, yes, I want to have those same career goals too?
Yeah.
Hey, we got one. We got one convert? Okay, let me ask you. Just from a presentation standpoint, you just heard 2 presentations. One was an overview of career goals. The other was an attempt to try to get you to have those career goals. Which was a more effective presentation? Like the first one? Okay. Tell me why.
That she knew more what she wanted to do. She just didn't know how to convince me how to.
Okay. Good. Anyone like the second one a little bit more?
I did.
David did? And Venetia did? Tell me, why'd you like the second one a little bit more?
It was more personal. The way he talked about it seemed like he put it in his perspective. Where the first time I was just talking about I, but the second time he was really like putting me in his shoes. Like,
So it was you. It was focused on you as his audience. And so
Right.
you like that. Venetia, how about you?
I like the passion that she had for what she wanted to go after.
Okay, so more passion. Why was there more passion the second time?
I mean, it's the same thing like David said. Like it was more, focused on the listener.
On you. Okay, so focused on you. All right, what'd you two think back there? Which was the better presentation?
I guess it's the first one
Okay, first one. Why was the first one better?
because he gave me a different perspective of his career.
Why didn't you like the second one? Okay, all right. So it varies. Sometimes folks like the first one. Sometimes folks like the second one. Most of the time, the second one tends to be better. And I realize it's not going to be perfect every time because when I just throw this at you on the spot, you all of a sudden have to sell yourself, and you're like, I don't know quite how to do it. So sometimes the first one is a little bit more methodical. But most of the time, folks like the second one better because it's focused on you. It's focused on the audience, and it brings out a sense of passion. It brings out an objective, a purpose for this presentation. And I'm going to focus the next 10 or so minutes on how having that type of objective helps us. First thing I want to mention is how this helps us focus on the audience and why we should focus on the audience. The reason we should focus on the audience is it is the only metric of success. Whether or not the audience responds to your presentation, whether or not your audience gets something out of your presentation is how you should evaluate whether or not you did a good job. Some people think that there's an objective standard for presentations where people like me sit on a committee, And once you get to heaven, they say you did a good job making this presentation. That doesn't exist. It's only the audience that's listening to you and only the audience that's judging you, and whether or not your presentation reached them. We know this. We know that the audience is important. But sometimes when we get nervous, it's more tempting, or very tempting, just to focus on ourselves and on our words and just listing, all right, this is my career goal. And sometimes that can come off as a little more polished, but it's not going to reach your audience the same way. So, why should we choose an objective? In addition to the fact that it helps us focus on our audience, let me first mention this disclaimer. You don't always have to have an objective or an agenda. If you're just hanging out with your friends, I'm not saying you need a clear objective when you're just chit-chatting with them. Although, there is some carryover to your business presentations and your social presentations. If your friends are constantly wondering what the point is to your story, or why you're talking to them, or how it relates to them, then they're going to be less inclined to listen to you next time, right? So, somewhat in your personal conversations, but even more so in your business conversations, your audience is going to want to know what you're trying to accomplish. What's your point? What's your objective? And I would suggest that if you don't have a purpose for making a presentation, and you're standing up here just saying words, I might say that you shouldn't be giving that presentation. If you don't have something that you need to convince your audience of, something you need to portray to the people that you're listening to, well, then you're just saying words. Does that make sense? Now, I mentioned I used to be an actor, and actors are great at just saying words. But that's even when actors are saying words effectively, they're still not as exciting to listen to until they're trying to engage with their scene partners, engage in the audience, trying to convince other folks or people they're on stage with of something meaningful. So the objective gives us that sense of purpose that elevates us just above saying words. An objective also forces us to do some interesting things. I break it down into 3 things. Try, monitor, and adjust. 1, just by having an objective, we try to accomplish it. So if our objective is to convince our audience of something, then we need to make an effort to do that. If I initially just give you the instructions, just list your career goals, you're not necessarily trying to accomplish anything. You don't need to use any of the techniques you're going to learn in this class with eye contact, body language, storytelling, any of that. You don't need to use those because you have no goal. So if you have an objective, it gives you something to try. Some reason to use these techniques. Not only that, but you're going to look at your audience and you're going to try to understand if it's working. If you have something to accomplish, right, you need to look at your audience to see if it's working. You're going to look at their reaction. If they're giving you a confused look, like, you're not just going to keep talking at them the same way. You might slow down. You might try a different mechanism of convincing them. Having an objective forces a presenter to try, monitor, and adjust. I want to mention this point on anxiety management and how having an objective helps us. Does anyone get nervous when they make presentations? All right, a little bit and yes. Anxiety is very, very common when we give presentations. In fact, you may have heard when pollsters ask people what are they most afraid of, the most common answer is speaking in public. Has anyone heard that before?
Yep.
Does anyone know what the number 2 most common fear is? Number 1 is speaking in public. Does anyone know what number 2 is?
Heights.
Heights. Heights is up there somewhere. Death. Death is number 2. All right, so people are afraid of speaking in public first and foremost, and afraid of dying after that. And then heights comes in somewhere down the list. We get very anxious. Why do we get anxious? Why do people get nervous when we give presentations? Armando.
There's a bunch of things. Whether you have an interest in the topic you're speaking about, if you're knowledgeable in the topic you're talking about, that's huge, I think.
Okay, tell me more about that. If you're knowledgeable.
So, if I go up there and I'm talking to you about, I don't know, PC hardware, right?
Okay.
And I don't know what I'm talking about, you're gonna start stuttering, you're gonna start making things up, you're gonna start looking at people awkwardly. My biggest thing with talking in public, like, this is cool, this doesn't bother me. But when I'm in that spotlight, it's like cotton mouth, my hands start freaking out, I'm stuttering. I got a list.
Okay.
I go from slow to fast, that's my favorite.
Slow. Oh, okay.
So,
Very
you know,
common.
I know what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm excited. And that's it. It's done. It's over.
Okay, so then you hit a patch where you're afraid that you don't know what you're talking about. Is that's what I'm hearing?
For me, yeah. Like, I feel like, am I saying the right thing? Are they making fun of me? I mean, that happens too. I mean, you talk up there and you say something that sounds a little silly, and they'll look at you like, yeah, what is this?
Okay. All right. I think what it comes down to is judgment. And what I'm hearing is that you're afraid people are judging you at certain points. And that's the crux of it. People are going to think you're lacking in professional competence. People are going to think you're not cool socially and not want to hang out with you. We fear this social and professional judgment. And to Armando's point, if we're in an area where we don't know what we're talking about, that's when we feel it more. We might even be anxious when it is our area of expertise, because that's when the stakes are higher. People think we're supposed to know what we're talking about. Like when I go to give presentations for corporations, I'll just meet people the very first day and I'll do a workshop, and everyone expects me to be really good at public speaking because that's what I'm teaching. But I still get nervous the same way. So when it's your area of expertise, the anxiety is a little bit higher. So how do we deal with this fear of professional failure and social rejection? How do we deal with it? What anxiety management techniques do we use? Armando?
I don't have an answer.
Oh, that was I don't know?
Please inform me.
Okay. Anyone have any ideas? What do you all use? David?
Breathing deeply.
Good, breathing deep. Because our heart starts beating. Adrenaline goes through our body, preparing for this life or death confrontation, which is professional failure and social isolation. We don't realize that there's no tiger in the room chasing us. It's something a little bit different, but we get anxious the same way. Adrenaline pumps through our body. We get short of breath because our blood's going to the muscles to prepare for this confrontation. We also lose a little bit of our mental focus because we're so occupied on the one thing that is threatening us, we fail to consider multiple variables as effectively. Maybe someone will ask you a question, and you'll be nervous, and you say, I don't know the answer. But then later you'll think, well, I knew the answer. It was just related to that other thing, which was related to what I knew a lot about. But in that moment, I was so focused on that one variable, I lost mental acuity. So to David's point, breathing deeply can help respond to that reaction. Decrease the heart rate, decrease the adrenaline going through your body. That's a good technique. Anything else? Letitia? Move around? Okay. So you're not so scared and stiff? All right, good. Some good physical engagement. That's good. Anything else anyone uses? Speaking slowly. Sure. How does that help us? Maybe we don't say anything silly. We're not tempted to just go off the cuff. Let me just take a breath here and speak slowly. Okay, fantastic. Let me suggest this to you. How about you focus on your objective? Now, when we get nervous, because we're being judged socially and professionally, that brings the focus all on us. And often we're more tempted just to concentrate on the words we're saying, the graphs we're presenting, and we forget that we're just trying to use those words and graphs to accomplish something for the audience. Okay? So we're worried about being judged socially and professionally, And we respond to that by words and graphs. What if we didn't care so much about the words and the graphs? Instead, we cared about accomplishing something for our audience. And we weren't thinking about how we were being judged. We were thinking about, am I accomplishing my objective by convincing my audience that they should have the same career goals? It takes our focus to our audience, away from ourselves, and reminds us that if we get one or two words wrong, that's not a big deal. What matters is, did we accomplish our objective? Focus on your objective. Make the presentation not about you, make it about your audience. All right, so let's shift a little bit to how we can use this objective focus in our business presentations. I want to ask you all, what types of business presentations do you give as MBA students or in your careers? What types of presentations do you do that we may be able to help you improve in this class? Amanda?
Like one-on-one meetings or just, I know I'm gonna start having to go to like these audit and finance meetings for the city, and I might have to speak at them, so.
Okay, speak before the city attorney and council people?
Yeah.
Okay, so one-on-one presentations, finance presentations before city official type of people. What other presentations do you all do?
Interview.
Interview is a big presentation. What's your name, by the way?
Maxine.
Maxine. Got it. Okay, interview. Very important presentation. What other presentation types do you all face? Armando.
I know in my career, I deal with a lot of, so I work for JP Morgan, and I deal with a lot of chief private client things where it's like, we discuss what the benefits are, and then I also partner, and sometimes, that can kind of, get used to it.
Is it like a sales presentation?
In a way, yeah, because, yeah, definitely a sales presentation, right.
Okay. All right, so we've got sales presentations, we've got finance presentations, we've got interviews. Presentation objective. What type of objectives do we have in these sales presentations, finance presentations, interview presentations? What's your purpose? Purpose maybe to get a job. I guess I'll take the easy one. If you're in a
Sell yourself.
interview, sell yourself, get a job. What about the finance presentations you do, Amanda? How might you define your objective there?
The data, the budgeting, like what you're doing.
Is it to just present the data?
Yeah.
Or might it be to use the data to prove something?
Yeah,
Oh, to get an approval. Okay. That hits on what I want to talk about next, which is a more powerful presentation is less so just presenting data and more trying to present data for a purpose or presenting a conclusion. And you all, in your careers as MBA students, are, if you're not there already, are probably moving closer and closer to a point where you're going to be less the person who just presents data and more the person who draws conclusions from that data. And I think that's an important part of the MBA value statement, is you all come to us with significant achievements in your field, your industry expertise. We teach you a little bit about a lot of things, a little bit about finance, a little bit about communications, a little bit about marketing. It gives you an ability to take a lot of pieces of data and draw the conclusions. And your audience is going to want to know, what's your point? What's your takeaway? So, I'm going to suggest to you that our objective, your objective, our objective in this class, your objective in your careers is going to be present conclusions, sell conclusions, use these conclusions. Your objective specifically might be to educate your audience with these conclusions, to persuade your audience with these conclusions, to do other types of things that are important to your audience, but you're going to be the person who is gathering up this data and telling your audience what it means. Would you agree with that? You all with me so far? That we are not so much the people who present data, we are more the people who present conclusions? Fantastic. So, constructing a presentation. Use conclusions to achieve an objective. You want to have a purpose. You want to have an objective up here? When you're making a presentation, and you, as the smart MBA student that your company paid a lot of money to send to business school or hired at a high salary because you knew a lot about business, you're going to use those conclusions and draw those conclusions. Quick definition of conclusion, just so we're on the same page. A judgment or decision reached by reasoning. Use your MBA reasoning to reach that judgment and use the presentation skills we will talk about in class to present it. Couple of examples, again, to make sure we're on the same page with conclusion. Take a look at these examples. Tell me if you think they are good conclusions or not so good conclusions. Investing in the pipeline project will put our company at an unacceptable level of risk. Do you like that as a conclusion? Yeah, I see some nods. I guess so I don't get in the dangerous situation of discussing it. Let me just tell you, I think that's a good conclusion. Yeah. All right, we have a decision. We have some obvious analysis that went into that. All right? And that's something that you can make a presentation about. How about this one? The data set shows an upward trend of 4%. You like this as a conclusion?
No.
No, you're not the person who just analyzes data and says it went up 4%. You tell us what it means. Tell us how that means you should invest more money in JP Morgan. Does that means you should spend less money on the city financial something or another? I have 6 years of accounting experience and I have completed my CPA. Is that a good conclusion?
Absolutely not.
No, that's not a good conclusion. That's just data. How about this one? I am an excellent candidate for the job. It's kind of an abrupt statement, but it is a good conclusion.
Yeah.
All right, it is a conclusion that we're looking for. Strong conclusions. What makes a strong conclusion? I'll ask you, what makes a strong conclusion? I guess you saw it there. You saw the little support. I guess you've got my notes anyway. Support, evidence. I like the term premises and logic. A strong conclusion wants to have premises that support that conclusion and logic that makes that conclusion sound. When I was an undergraduate in college, I sat in on a philosophy class for one day, and the one thing I took away from that is that strong conclusions are supported by accurate premises that logically lead to that conclusion. So we could call the points that support your conclusion support or evidence. I'm just going to call them premises for simplicity of the conversation. So you're going to have various pieces of support or evidence. We'll call them premises. You're going to put all those together. You're going to have conclusions. And you're going to think about how you can present those verbally and non-verbally. All right, got a premise definition, so we're all on the same page. I won't really bother with that right now. Logic. Let me talk about logic a little bit. There's nothing complicated here with the logic that I'm trying to convince you of. So let me just give you an example. Wait a minute. I'm lost here. All right. Premise. Let's start with some premise examples, and then we'll go with some logical argument examples. And then you'll see I'm not trying to teach you anything fancy. I'm just trying to use some basic building blocks. Premise examples, such as the data shows an upward trend of 4%. Fine premise. So that's your premise. That's what you start with. And you as the MBA student, tell us what the conclusion is. Another good premise would be I have 6 years of accounting experience and I have completed my CPA. All right, that's the premise. Now let's say what that means to you and your company. Logical conclusion examples. All right, this will give you an idea what I mean when I say logic. Take a look at this logical statement. The candidate has great quantitative skills, so I recommend that we offer her the job. Do you like the logic in this conclusion? Alright, straight to the point. Is this logical?
Right.
Is it missing any steps of logic? What if
Could be
this is
better.
like a construction job?
And it's kind of, that's odd.
It's not logical.
Right.
Or we're missing something here. We're missing a premise. Right? It is quantitative skills are the best way to assess candidates for this role. And candidate X has the best quantitative skills, so I recommend that we offer her the job. It may look like I'm nitpicking at little points, but where I'm going with this is that when you identify these as the building blocks of your presentation, you can use verbal and nonverbal skills to draw attention to those. That's one thing you can do. Other thing you can do is eliminate other things from your presentation. Once you mentally think through what is important, you can get rid of a lot of things that you might be tempted to say that are just going to distract your audience. So, good example of logic with the premise and with the conclusion. Content development. So you're going to present a business conclusion next week. You're going to think about what you want to talk about. And as you develop your content, the first thing I'm going to suggest you do is start with an objective, something you're trying to accomplish. And then as you think about what you're going to say to accomplish that objective, I'm going to suggest you break it into premises and one or two conclusions. Doing this, as I mentioned, will clarify your presentation. Help you think about what you want to include in your presentation. If it doesn't have anything to do with your objective, if it's not a premise or not a conclusion, you can think about eliminating. You can also draw your own attention to what is important in your presentation and how you should organize it. Emphasizing content, what you should de-emphasize and what you might eliminate, how you could organize things. Confidence and brevity. All right, this is an interesting concept. Sometimes I will coach folks who ramble on, and I will suggest to them, you're rambling on and on because you're getting nervous in the middle of a presentation. So let's think about the important conclusions and premises in your presentation, and once you've said those, you know you can stop talking. Confidence and brevity. Presenting conclusions. All right, I mentioned a couple times, once we know what our conclusions are, we can think about how to present them verbally and non-verbally. First, let me ask you this. We know what our conclusion is. Do we need to state it to our audience? Actually say it? Do we need to actually say our conclusion, or can we say, conclusion is obvious, I'm just going to let it speak for itself? No, it's not. So why do we need to say it? It may be obvious to us, but it's not obvious to our audience. It's data. The data speaks to you because of your expertise, but you need to actually say it to your audience. Don't let it speak to itself. Don't assume it's obvious. All right. Now, let's go over some of those ways to present a conclusion verbally, present a conclusion non-verbally. Now, how do we do something so complicated as present a conclusion verbally? What might we do? What might we say? This is really difficult. Armando?
I mean, people a lot of times will just basically say in conclusion or.
Yes, based on this data, the conclusion is. I was being facetious by saying this is really difficult. Just say this is the conclusion. We forget this when we get nervous and we talk really fast. These very simple techniques will help our audience understand what we can tell from this data, what we take away, the interpretation. How about non-verbally? What are some things you can do non-verbally to show your audience you've got to the important part of your presentation?
Hand gestures.
Hand gestures? Yeah, but what specifically might you? Would you say conclusion? What would be the hand gesture? Conclusion. Alright, when I go like this means conclusion.
It's
Maybe.
kind of the
Or like this. Okay, so we sum it all. So we sum it all up, and we could do something. Absolutely. Anything else?
Visuals, like pictures.
Pictures. All right, a picture, maybe a picture that says the conclusion is.
Yeah.
So imagine this. You say the conclusion is, you have a picture that says the conclusion is, and you use a hand gesture that says when we wrap it all up, that's going to show your audience what you think is important. We might pause. We might use a slower rate of speech. These two are key. I think Armando said earlier, you talk fast when you get nervous, right?
Yeah, I get anxious, I think. Yeah.
These are two extremely powerful techniques. A lot of folks will talk really fast, especially when anxiety gets involved. Maybe they've been talking for a while, and when they get to the important part of their speech, they forget to slow down because they've already gotten wound up. But suppose you pause right before you say your conclusion, and you pause right after you say your conclusion. Your audience will get a nonverbal cue that that's the important thing. That's the thing I need to listen to. Slow down the rate of your speech. You may be very familiar with this material, but you forget that your audience is not. So you need to talk slowly. You might present a little bit faster when you're just listing the data. But when you get to the conclusion, slower rate of speech will help you. Casual tone, relaxed posture. So you might be sitting up here presenting data very fast in a more formal posture, more formal tone. And then you combine it all together. Use Amanda's suggestion of a slide that says the conclusion is. You say the conclusion is. You speak in a slightly slower, more casual tone, relaxed posture. Your audience is going to get the message. This is when they need to focus in on the important thing. Shift in movement, visual aid. Okay, great. So those are some verbal and nonverbal techniques for presenting a conclusion. How about presenting premises? Let's go through these quickly. Verbally, you might just say the facts are, Bloomberg says this. You might interject some of your opinions. I bring this up because I don't want you to think that you have to wait till you get to your conclusions to say some of your own opinions, but you as an expert may have some opinions about this data that lead to the conclusion. So Bloomberg says this, and most economists understand that the upward sloping demand curve indicates this. So now let me get to the conclusion. Assumed agreement. I bring this up sometimes. There may be a conclusion or premise that is very important for you to state, very important for you to say out loud, but you're afraid that your audience might feel like you're talking down to them. You feel like, oh, that's too simple. I can't actually even say that out loud. Because they'll think, I don't think they know. So what I suggest in those situations is use this assumed agreement technique by saying, as you know, as I'm sure you are aware, the data shows an upward trend of 4%. It's very important that we clarify that. Now let's move on to what that means. Use this assumed agreement technique if necessary. As you know, as you can see, non-verbally. All right, I mentioned for non-verbally presenting conclusions, you might slow down. I'm not going to tell you to speed up for premises. You might go slower for both of them, both premises and especially slow for conclusion. But one thing I'm going to mention for a non-verbal cue to show that you're listing various premises is use what I call a presentation motif. Let me explain this. Let me first tell you the definition and then explain it. Presentation motif is a reoccurring verbal or physical action used to indicate a parallel relationship between sections of a presentation. So you may have 3 points that support your conclusion. And as you go through them, you may use a reoccurring physical action such as point 1, point 2, point 3. Very simple. As you do that hand motion, your audience knows that you're going through the 3 points that are going to support that takeaway. It may be a recurring slide sort of system. But the most common one I've seen is point 1, point 2, point 3. Very simple technique that helps your audience understand where you're coming from. talk a little bit about organization. In terms of the structure of your presentation, I use the terms beginning, middle, and end. I used to use more complicated terms, but now I just use beginning, middle, and end. You're going to start your presentation. You're going to say a few words. It's going to be obvious that you're getting started. As you get into your presentation, it will be obvious that you're getting into the meat of your presentation. And then at some point, it's going to seem like you're wrapping up, you're getting to the end of your presentation. It's not scientific, but your presentation will have a sense of a beginning, middle, and end. Let me show you this graph, which will tell us a little bit about how our audience is focusing on us, the level of attention our audience is giving us at the beginning, middle, and end. So on this graph, the attention retention curve, on this axis we have the attention that our audience is paying to us, starting at 0 up to 100%. On the horizontal axis we have beginning, middle, and end time going on. So take a look at that graph. Tell me what, this is not scientific, by the way. This is a phenomenon that has been noticed by many people, including this company, miscommunication. But go ahead and look at the takeaway on that graph and tell me what's going on.
You need to get your point across in the beginning of the beginning of it at the end.
Yeah. So
The rest is fluff.
audience attention is high at the beginning. Audience attention is high at the end. It's not as high in the middle. Now we can talk about some ways to push this up, but for now we want to think about what it is and think about how we can position ourselves to most effectively present our conclusion. And as Armando said, we want to think about getting our point across here, and we want to think about getting our point across here, and doing the best we can with exciting techniques in the middle. So with that, let's think about where we're going to put these important conclusions in terms of the beginning, the middle, and the end. At the beginning, I would suggest you throw out a piece of your conclusion. Your audience's attention is at its height. They are focused on you. I would suggest you use that opportunity to allude to your conclusion, give a teaser to your conclusion, show your audience where you're going when they're focused on you. You might also provide a little context. I'd say two things at the beginning, the conclusion, and a little bit of context. Now, people get a little confused when I explain this next point. Because next I'm going to say we're getting on to the middle part of our presentation. Now, I already suggested that you throw out your conclusion at the beginning. But as you get into the meat of your presentation, you're going to need to explain what you mean by your conclusion, and you're going to face a choice. Do I start by explaining the conclusion first, or do I start by explaining the premises first and work up to the conclusion and explain the conclusion last? So what are your thoughts on this? As we get into the meat of our presentation, do we want the conclusion first, or do we want the conclusion last?
To it.
Who said build up to it? Armando thinks build up to it, conclusion last. Venetia likes conclusion first? Why do you like conclusion first, Venetia?
Well, the graph.
From the graph. Okay.
Yeah.
You see, it was like this
The graph tells us that our audience will be focused more on us at the beginning. We will gain benefits of that graph. Now, there are points where we might want to use the conclusion last, and let's discuss those. But for the most part, I would suggest you get into your conclusion first, because this is going to emphasize your conclusion as important. The takeaway is important. What's not as important is the analysis you did, per se, to get to that point, or the things that happened in the background, perhaps. What the audience wants to know is what's the important takeaway. And I would suggest while you have their attention, emphasize it. Conclusion last will emphasize the process. I like to use the example. When you're giving a presentation, you're asking your audience to put together pieces of a puzzle. So you're giving them information, those are pieces of a puzzle, you're asking them to put together a whole puzzle. And if you give them the conclusion first, you are telling them the picture that is on that puzzle. Okay? If you give them the conclusion last, You're asking them to put together a puzzle that does not have a picture on it. Has anyone ever tried to put together a puzzle that does not have a picture on it? It's very, very difficult. Sometimes people will do it for fun with the little kids' puzzle. But if you have that sense of where you're going, just like when you're trying to put together a puzzle, if you have that picture, that overview, you have a better understanding of where things fit. Now, there are a couple reasons why you might favor a conclusion last. One of them is you might have a hostile or skeptical audience. And that is a situation where I recommend you think about working up to it. Because if you know your audience is going to dislike your conclusion, you might want to avoid hitting them in the face with it right at the beginning. Because they might say, oh, I disagree with your conclusion, I'm not going to pay attention, or I'm going to ask lots of questions at the beginning that are going to throw you off, that you were going to get to, but you might distract the conversation that way. So, I think most of the time conclusion first, again the attention and retention curve benefits. Sometimes conclusion last, in particular if you have a hostile, skeptical audience. Okay, then we get to the end of our presentation. We know that our audience is realized. We are towards the end of our presentation. Now I know a lot of people will often waste this opportunity at the end. They'll be giving a presentation, they'll be going through their data, and then they'll just stop. And they'll say, oh, that was the end of my presentation. They have missed an opportunity to gain your attention and accent their important points, and reinforce their important points. So by indicating that they're wrapping up, the audience can't pay attention the whole time. They can't pay 100% focus. They're naturally going to drift a little bit. But if you indicate that you're about to end, your audience will focus a little bit more, and you can tell them the important thing to your presentation one more time. All right. So that's a little bit about the conclusion framework. Any questions on that? Any comments on it? Yes.
So you're
Maxine.
basically providing the conclusion or convincing them over and over. You're being repetitive throughout the entire presentation.
Yeah. Yeah.
To sell your point.
Yeah. I would say being repetitive is good. It may seem like you're being overly repetitive, but that may just be because you're familiar with the content, familiar with the industry. I mean, has anyone ever told you you're being too repetitive with your main point before? I would go as far as you can until you hear that. Because I really never tell anyone that. And I coach people on presentations all the time. My comment is always, I need more of a focus on your main point. I need a clear understanding of what that is. Okay, let me talk about a couple different presentation methods. And we'll talk about how you're going to use this conclusion framework, objective framework, and this presentation method to do your assignment for next week. A couple different ways you can present a speech. You can read it word for word, is one way. You can memorize it word for word, is another way. You can use an outline to give a presentation, or you can memorize an outline to give a presentation. Let's talk about each of these four, when you might use these, what sort of presentations they might be best suited for. So let's start with the first one. When might you want to read a presentation word for word?
When no one's going to ask you questions.
Oh, okay. Okay. No one's, in the middle of it?
Yeah, because the same thing goes with the second one. If you're reading word for word or memorizing word for word, and you break away from that,
Okay.
it's going to throw off whatever you were trying to accomplish.
Okay, yeah. So I'd say for both of these do not lend themselves to interaction. When might this be a good idea? I guess, well, to your point, when no one's going to ask you any questions, you're just making a press conference, a statement. You're not planning on questions. Amanda, did you have something?
No, I was gonna say speech.
Oh, like what kind of speech stuff?
Like, I don't know.
State of the Union,
Yeah.
when it's just you talking and they're listening.
Or
Okay.
even thank you speech, just because you don't want to forget like certain things. So
Okay. Thank you speech, State of the Union speech. The State of the Union speech is a very formal speech where language is extremely important. And so that might be a great occasion, if you all give your State of the Union speech, to write it out and say it word for word. A thank you speech, maybe there's an occasion to use a written word for word, just so you make sure you thank everyone. But I might suggest that a thank you speech, you might lose a little bit of sincerity with a speech that's read word for word. When you're saying thank you, it's a sincere, this means something to me. And if I have to read word for word, it seems like it means less to you. Okay, so when language is important, press conferences, State of the Union address, you might read word for word. How about memorize word for word? When might you want to give that type of presentation?
When you're saying like your vows,
Yes.
you might
Okay.
just want to just
Okay.
memorize it instead of reading it or using looking around.
Okay. So vows, your language is important. It's fairly short, hopefully, I guess. I've never taken vows, but fairly short. And it's possible to memorize it. And I think you could still infuse some sincerity in a vow, even though it's memorized word for word. It's hard to memorize things word for word, though.
Yeah.
Vows might be an example. An elevator pitch might be another example.
Yep.
That's something where you have a few seconds to make an impression. So you might want to think very carefully about exactly what you're going to say if you meet that person who could give you your dream job. And you're going to practice it so you can sound sincere. All right, so that's some good examples of when you might memorize word for word. How about use an outline? You have a speech, you have a little outline of maybe 5 or 6 points you want to cover, and you just follow along those and speak freely in between those points. When might that be an effective way to give a presentation?
It's like keynote presentations, right?
What's that?
It's like keynote, like the old Apple keynote presentations.
Yeah, keynote or PowerPoint presentations too. Like this is my outline. I'm giving a speech right now with an outline. That's what I'm doing. This is an effective way to give a presentation if you are speaking on a topic where you need a few things to guide you. Words are not extremely important in terms of you don't have to say the exact right thing. You just need to accomplish your objective by pointing out various conclusions and showing premises. This is a very common way to give a presentation. And it allows you to keep some of a casual tone and keep some sincerity because you're not reading word for word or you're not memorizing word for word. Another common way to give a presentation is just to memorize that outline. So you're going to have a short 2-minute speech. All right, there are 4 things I want to talk about. I want to talk about this. Okay. And then just come up and give your presentation. And in your head, think, all right, point 1, now I'm moving on to point 2, point 3, and once I get to point 4, I'm done. Outline, use of outline, memorize outline, brings a little bit more of a casual tone. Often, these are the most effective ways to move an audience, persuade an audience, and keep sincerity in terms of yourself as a presenter. You do lose something when you memorize word for word or read word for word, but sometimes that's important because the language is essential. Now, your presentation for next week, I would suggest you use one of these 2 methods. Use an outline or memorize an outline. Now let's talk a little bit about your presentation that you're going to give next week. It is present a conclusion, 1 to 2 minutes in length. Use this framework we talked about in class. Think about your conclusion. Think about a couple of premises to support it. Think about how you can present that conclusion verbally, present that conclusion non-verbally, and present it in class too. This can be on any topic. Might be business related. Maybe it'll be something that's a little more personal, a little more social. That's fine too. Just something to give us a chance to practice. You might give a 2-minute presentation on why you're an excellent candidate for a certain job. You might give a 2-minute presentation on why the Bronx campus is better than the Dobbs Ferry campus. You might give a 2-minute presentation on why passive investing is better than active investing. Why it's better to rent a house, rent your own home rather than own your own home. It can be anything you want. Just something to give us some fodder to practice this conclusion framework. Any questions? Any questions maybe on what you might present on? Maybe I could get some ideas from you all. And essentially whatever ideas you say, I'll probably just say that's a great idea. And you'll see that it's just open. Any presentation topics, suggestions, ideas? Yes.
To lease or to buy a car?
Yeah. All right. Is it better to lease or to buy a car? Okay. That's a great presentation topic. We probably got a conclusion there. It's going to be better to do one or the other. And there's going to be some quantitative things to support that.
Now, do I have to like pick a side, or can I just kind of talk about
Pros and cons of each?
yeah.
Okay. You could. I'm not saying you could. I'm saying what I will say is that it will lend itself to a more effective presentation and a better way to practice the conclusion framework if you do pick a side. It's just going to be easier for you to say the conclusion is. It's going to be easier in a 2-minute presentation for you to say these are the premises that support that conclusion. Now, I'm not saying you have to. I'm not saying that you couldn't give a presentation. It would just be a lot longer, I think, and a lot more complicated. Any other presentation topic ideas? Roll the dice?
Yeah, when I go home,
Just roll it? Okay, yeah. Okay, or Google, what's a good presentation topic? Anything you want. Any questions about this assignment or how it's going to work? Yes, Armando.
So we'll be in front, right?
Yeah, you'll be right here.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. You won't use slides. You will present it either by memorizing your outline, or you could have a little note card if you want with I would suggest an outline. All right, great. So let's see. I've got maybe about 30, 40 minutes on the writing stuff. Do we want to take a quick break now? Do we want to just work through?
I'm down for working through it if it gets us out a little bit earlier.
Work through? Work
Yeah.
through? All right, great. What are your names, by the way?
Interesting.
Yuka? Yoka. Fati. Good to meet you. All right, great. So let's talk about writing conclusions. When we write conclusions, we write a conclusion, we call it a thesis. We could call it a conclusion, but just so no one gets confused with what you learned in English class, a thesis is the written form of a conclusion. This thesis is a short statement that summarizes the main point of your essay. Just like a conclusion wraps up the main point of your presentation, thesis. What is a thesis? It's the finding, the takeaway, the proposal, the conclusion, the point, your opinion. All right, it's the same central thing. We're just going to spend a few minutes talking about how we present that in writing, as opposed to our conversation earlier about how we present that when we make a presentation. And to do that, I am going to suggest, I'm going to teach you, I'm going to go over this framework for writing a 1-page business essay that is going to frame a conclusion. And it's going to have a few very common components that I'm sure you've heard of before, but I'm going to ask you to do it in this framework so we can practice those in a business essay format. There are going to be a title, a thesis paragraph, subheadings, subheading paragraphs, and topic sentences. I'm going to give you an example of this, and I'm going to go through all of these carefully to a point where I'm sure you will not have questions about them. Let me throw this example up of the type of essay that you might submit 2 weeks from now when you are presenting a clear thesis. Could also be called a clear conclusion, but it's going to be in writing, and it's going to be in a 1-page format. So we've got a sample essay here. We've got a recommendation for an organizational for organizational changes. We've got a little intro paragraph, which I'm going to call the thesis paragraph, and that's going to have a thesis statement in it. We'll read it in a minute, but I can assure you it's there. The main point of what you're trying to say is in that thesis paragraph. You can see we've got these bolded subheadings. Visually draw attention to how we're presenting this information. Underneath these bolded subheadings, we have short paragraphs. And each of these short paragraphs, we start with a topic sentence. So let me read just the first part of this essay to you, and let me explain how this plays out with this format that I want to encourage you to use for this upcoming assignment and for future assignment, a couple future assignments in this class. So, this recommendation for organizational changes. The first thesis paragraph is, as an industry, pharmaceutical research is constantly evolving and pioneering new discoveries that helps patients overcome disease. In order to remain competitive in this environment, our company structure must be able to support a flexible workforce. To support a flexible workforce, I recommend that we flatten organizational structure, consolidate departments, and deploy an electronic notebook. Anyone have a guess of which of those sentences is the thesis statement? Maxine likes the last sentence. You all like the last sentence as the thesis of this sample essay? Yeah. We've got a little bit of context, a little bit of warm-up, and then we get to something that is a clear recommendation in 3 parts. We had a sense that this essay was about recommendations just by looking at the title. And if we look further, we can see that those 3 recommendations are bolded in subheadings. And just already what we know about this essay, we have a very good sense of where it's going to go. Just by looking at the title, recommendation for org changes. Then quickly reading that first paragraph, we are able to zero in on the thesis, and we are able to see that thesis played out with subheading paragraphs. And in each of those subheading paragraphs are going to start with a topic sentence. Can anyone tell me what a topic sentence is? Letitia.
A sentence that describes the paragraph?
Yes, a sentence that describes the paragraph. It's like a little mini thesis for that paragraph. It's the main idea of that paragraph. And there's a slide on this later. We'll make sure everyone's clear on it. But I think we can get most of the information just by looking at this essay. So, we've got the topic sentence, and we've got information below the topic sentence that supports this. I make the point that using this format, it's not necessarily the way you'll write all the time, but it's an effective way to write a lot of the time. It's a way that very quickly and immediately can show whoever you're writing to what's in your essay, what's valuable about it, what information is contained that relates to them. And it also plays into what I would say is the MBA value statement we talked about earlier. You all know a lot about a number of different things, and your ability to pull all those pieces of data together and come up with what is important, what clearly needs to be portrayed in this written document, is going to make you valuable. And visually, by looking at this and quickly scanning through it, you know immediately what this is about. And you also know where you can read further to get more information about each of these points. Like we haven't read this bottom 3/4 of the essay yet, but we have a good sense of what's there. If we want more information about how this electronic notebook works, we know we might hit the first sentence and know it's probably a topic sentence because it's well written, and have more explanation of what's there. And I also make the point when I grade these, when I grade your essays, if it's written in this format, I can very quickly and immediately know what your essay is about just visually by looking at it and by following your writing. If you're following this format, it just hits me in the face. This is exactly what this essay is about. And that's the kind of writer that I want to encourage you to be. And that's why I'm going over this very specific format to help you practice that. I want you to be the MBA who can send a memo to someone in a different department, someone at a higher level than you, and that person who's going to be reading it is going to say, wow, this really saves my time. This really decreases the amount of energy I need to put into understanding the concept because it just hits me in the face. What is important in this memo? What's important in this essay? What's important about this project? So, with that lengthy overview, let's break down each of those points and make sure there are no further questions on it. This first one, the title. We have a recommendation for organizational changes. This engages and informs us somewhat. This provides context. This may or may not be the thesis. There's a good chance it might be. It doesn't necessarily have to be. Title does these things. Thesis paragraph. You may have heard this called an introduction or an executive summary. I'm just calling it a thesis paragraph. Actually, to clarify, I'm not necessarily calling it a thesis paragraph. This is based on a business communications textbook at Rutgers Business School. The former head of the communications department, Carter Daniel, pioneered this thesis subheadings format, and I've taken a lot of this stuff from his work. So, what Carter Daniel calls the thesis paragraph, you may have heard it called just an introduction, just an executive summary. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, just the first paragraph. It will contain the thesis. It should contain the thesis. It should contain the thesis for a couple reasons. One, because I'm grading you that way. And two, because if you're writing an essay to someone in your company or someone in another company, and you wait till the second paragraph to get to the really important point, I suspect that reader is going to be a little bit annoyed and not feel that you're the type of person who can give them valuable information quickly. First paragraph. Indicates subheading content and predicted order. Remember in our example, there were 3 recommendations, and those 3 recommendations were contained in the thesis statement. And I'll remind you of what those were and how they are in a predicted order, and provides context as necessary. Okay, so that is the thesis paragraph. Let's revisit this thesis paragraph example. This is the exact same paragraph on our example. Let me just draw your attention. Actually, no, I've got it. I've already done it. We've already talked about this as a thesis paragraph, and it contains the thesis and indicates the subheadings. Okay. Brings us to those subheadings. These subheadings should be predictable from the thesis statement, and they were in the example. You don't want to have 3 ideas in your thesis statement and then have 3 completely different subheadings. The reader's going to scratch their head and say, wait a minute, I thought you were talking about expanding into China, but now you're talking about something else. Predictable, parallel structure. I want those bulleted points to be in parallel structure. Can anyone tell us what parallel structure is? What is parallel structure? Parallel structure is that each of those headings are the same part of speech, meaning they're all nouns, or they're all verbs, or they're all the same combination. For example, the subheadings in this example were, let me see what they were. They were flatten organizational structure, consolidate departments, deploy electronic notebook. They all 3 start with a verb: flatten, consolidate, deploy. And following that verb is some noun: organizational structure, departments, notebook. Parallel structure makes it easier on your reader to follow where you're going. Easier on your reader to absorb the information. And I'll have some examples of parallel structure in a minute. But for now, we know what parallel structure is, and we want our subheadings to be in parallel structure. Concise. All right, we want short, concise subheadings. We don't want sentence-long subheadings. It defeats the purpose. The subheadings, the point of the subheadings is to guide our audience and to help them, aid them, not give them something else that's going to be just as lengthy and confusing as the paragraph itself. Concise. Again, your ability to whittle down all this data to concise, powerful statements is important, and it's valuable. Where am I? Okay, yes. So, this is the thesis and subheading example. This is the same thesis paragraph. Remember, we liked this last sentence as our thesis. To support a flexible workforce, I recommend that we flatten our organizational structure, consolidate departments, and deploy electronic notebook. Reading that, we have a very good sense of what our subheadings will be. Flatten organizational structure, consolidate departments, deploy electronic notebook. Those are predictable. They are in a predictable order, and they are in parallel structure. All those things added together makes this concise, dense essay much easier to read. Let's revisit parallel structure and make sure we're clear on what that is. Got a couple examples. Suppose I were to give you this in parallel structure. An objective forces us to try, monitor, and make adjustments. Is that in parallel structure?
Yeah.
And is this kind of? Remember what I said earlier? It forces us to try, monitor, and adjust. That's in parallel structure. 3 words that are verbs, that are concise, and make it easier for us to understand. But try, monitor, make adjustments. It's just a little extra, whoa. Why are you doing this? Why are you adding this extra word here? Is this a whole different thing? Make it easier on your audience. Stick with try, monitor, and adjust. Don't say try, monitor, make adjustments. And don't say try, monitor, adjusting is necessary for a presenter. Don't do that. Another example. Tell me if you like this one. Examine facts. Point 1. Point 2. Question witnesses. Point 3. Present recommendations. Do we like the parallel structure there? Yes. Good parallel structure. Starts with a verb, noun, verb, noun, verb, noun. Last example. Italy. France. Brooklyn. Do we like the parallel structure there? No, you're shaking your head. Shaking your head, man. Why not?
But they don't really go together.
Yeah, this is weird. It's like, you make me scratch my head. Why do you make me scratch my head and try to figure out why Brooklyn is in the same category as Italy and France? Now, this is a nuanced example of a violation of parallel structure because they all are nouns, technically. But putting it in this fashion, in this way, makes it harder on your audience. You don't want to make anything harder on your audience. Okay, so that's parallel structure. We're on to topic sentences. We mentioned earlier that a topic sentence is like a mini thesis. It is the main point of a paragraph. A sentence that expresses the main idea of the paragraph in which it occurs. Mini thesis, usually the first sentence. You may remember from your English class in high school, there's no requirement that it has to be the first sentence, but I recommend you usually make it the first sentence, and I recommend that for the assignments in this class that you make the topic sentence your first sentence. This is not a creative writing class where we're trying to intrigue our audience, make them guess what the topic of the paragraph is. We're going to come right out and say it. Thesis, subheading, paragraph example. So let me just take this section of the essay we're looking at with organizational changes. This is the first subheading, I believe. Flatten organizational structure. We see the subheading. We know what's contained in this paragraph. We could read the first sentence and say, first, we must flatten our organizational structure in order to allow our scientists to make decisions faster. Because it's well written, we suspect that is the the topic sentence. We know we have more information because of the subheading, and we have even more of the information because the thesis was so obvious when we initially looked at it. So, the point I like to make is that the rest of this paragraph, it might be complicated, and it's okay. If you need to get into some complicated technical details, you have built yourself some credibility to do that. Because you've provided such a clear roadmap for your reader. You've used all those techniques with the thesis, the title, the subheading, the topic sentence. What comes next, maybe you need to get a little complicated, and if you do, that's fine. Because you've so clearly laid out where you're going. Subheading paragraph example. Which brings us back to the finished product. We talked about a title that provides context, may or may not contain the thesis. We talked about a thesis paragraph, which provides some context and some overview, and contains the thesis statement. The thesis statement makes the subheadings predictable and illustrates the subheadings in a parallel structure fashion. And then visually we see these subheadings. We see them with some white space around them. We see them bolded. We have even more information. Each of these subheading paragraphs is going to have a topic sentence at the start. And it's going to have information that supports that. Any questions on Carter Daniels' thesis subheading format?
This is also going to be on anything, right? This one page.
Oh yeah, anything. Could be on anything. Let's go over some topic ideas. Give me some ideas. What sort of topic you might write your business essay on?
The deregulation of airplane industry.
The deregulation of airplane industries. Great topic. What might the thesis be?
I'll look it up.
Deregulation has decreased price by doing point 1, point 2, point 3. What else? Other business writing topic ideas. Yes.
Introducing a new product in the market.
Okay, yes, this new product in the market will make social media more accessible, will increase security, and will be done at a low cost. All right, that might be your thesis statement. And then you have your 3 subheadings, which are going to spell out each of those 3 things. What else? Okay, you get the idea. And if you made any suggestions, I would just say that sounds like a great idea. And I might give you some suggestions on how you formulate that thesis. This can be a powerful technique to writing. Powerful because it can show your audience with such clarity so quickly what you're writing about. And I mentioned earlier that it makes you valuable. It makes you a valuable MBA student who can consolidate information and boil it down to that important thesis. And when I grade these, a 10 out of 10 paper takes me 2 minutes to grade because it's just so obvious. It just hits me exactly what this essay is about. I see everything in the format, and I understand where you're going. I skim through the thesis paragraph. I skim through 1 or 2 more paragraphs. Boom, done. I just type, great job, 10 out of 10. A paper that's 6, 7, 8 out of 10, those take me a really long time to grade. Because it takes me a while to figure out what you're saying. And then it takes me a while to explain how you could have done it differently in this format in a way that would have been clearer. So make it easier on your audience. The person that's grading your paper, So I can take 2 minutes. There's 10 of you. Maybe if I get them all graded in 20 minutes, that would be like a dream come true to me. But more importantly, think about how this is going to be clear to someone you send this to, your boss, someone in a different department, someone who's going to read it and say, yeah, this is someone who really knows how to bring out the important information on this issue. So we got, alright, so write an essay that states and supports a conclusion, 1 page or less. Use the framework outlined in class. Submit via Blackboard prior to class 3. Has everyone used Blackboard before? Yeah. Okay, if you haven't used Blackboard, you can definitely ask me. If you have questions, I can also direct you to technical folks who can help you. Or sometimes for the first assignment you need an extra day to figure it out, that's fine too. But just do what you need to do to figure out how to get the Blackboard submission working. Alright, I'll look forward to seeing you all next week with your business presentation. We'll think about presenting those with the conclusion framework we talked about, and we'll also incorporate some body language and some eye contact stuff next week. Great meeting you all. Great having you all in class. See you next week. Armando. So how did you, or no, Orlando. Armando, thanks for all the right comments. Armando. How did you log in? You just put your username and ID?
Yeah.
So did you
Username and password.
Did you put like mercy /
No. I think for password might be a little different though.
Yeah, it was giving me something about. Anyway, yeah, thanks. I'll figure it out. Appreciate it.
Is there any
Yes.
sheet or
There's no. You are.
This is water.
what's your
Yoka. Yoka. And Fati.
What did you get?
So I have
Yoka. Yeah, did you have any questions about anything that have anything to came in? Before I came into class, anything on the syllabus or anything?
Only spot into what
first time you came here, but you remember math, so part of the
Yeah, it is. It's weird.
Yeah.
To solve that,
Yeah, I'm just hoping my car is still there when I get there. It's the first time I was on this campus too. So.
I got a people, but it was like, yeah, my brothers will be together, right? Like, all one will get it for me. I didn't really get like,
What do you think? Does it seem?
hard.